so moving on to part 2. So you're pricking. Okay, that's what we call the patterns, and we call it a pricking because you would have to prick your pattern out back in the day. Okay, so back in the day, lace makers actually would have a piece of cardboard and there'd be holes in it, and that would be the pattern. Okay, and they would know what they're doing, they would follow it, and that would be great. We're a lot luckier these days. Our patterns have lines on them and dots where the holes have to go. Okay, makes it a lot easier. So when you're preparing your pricking, the first thing is always have a copy. Don't work on the original. Okay, if the original's on a book, then obviously don't work on the original. So generally what you do is you just photocopy it, or scan and print it, and you make a copy. Okay, we are a lot luckier because obviously back in the day, if they wanted to make a copy of a pattern, all they'll do is put another piece of cardboard underneath and go through the holes, and thereby transferring the pricking. Okay, but I still remember reading in lace books where they would actually mention putting a 10 centimeter line next to your pattern when you copy it, because copiers previously used to distort your copy. So nowadays we don't need to worry about that. Nowadays it's really easy. Okay, so you're going to make a copy, okay, and then there's a couple ways to prepare. So obviously this one is made a copy, put it on cardboard, and I just put the sticky adhesive on there, and that's perfectly fine. The only challenge comes in if you're working with white thread on white. That can get a bit tiring. Okay, so one way of doing that is you can actually take your pattern, and before you put the sticky adhesive on, you take a blue highlighter and you just highlight over the pattern, making it blue, and then put the sticky on top. So the reason we say blue is, like I mentioned, blue is very soothing on the eyes. So it's the color you'll see the most often used on pillows, cots, and sometimes prickings. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. So this is the sticky adhesive you find in the shop, and obviously the one issue is it's glossy, which isn't an issue unless you've working out in the sun and it hits your pattern and then it shines in your eyes. So the way of getting rid of that is to take the scrubber that you find that for your kitchen, and this is a portion of one I cut out and I keep. And what it is if you want to take it away, like I've done over here, if you see the top bit here, it's that little bit over there is not shiny anymore, it's matte. So all I did is I took this and I scrubbed it down, so you can see like over here. So this is you can see this down here is shiny. So all I do is I just scrub a bit, and now you'll see it's a little less shiny over the lines. So that's just a nice quick thing to do. Okay. If you're lucky enough to order supplies from lace makers, you can find this blue sticky. Some of them also sell the orange one, and it's great because it's already matte. Okay, so then that's one way. That's way of doing it. The one thing is, you'll see here I leave a margin around the pattern. It's just so that you're not working right by the pattern, and it just gives you a bit of a working area around. And I like just scribbling down the details about the pattern just for reference sake. Okay. Great. The one other thing that you need to do to prepare your pattern is to pin holes in it. Okay, so if you've got a pin vise, awesome. If you don't have a pin vise, then I wouldn't use a normal pin because your finger's going to hurt like hell. I'd use one of these that has a head, and then all you'll do is you'll just pin all the holes. Okay, and you'll try and do it perpendicular, nice and neat in the middle of the hole, because the neater your pin holes, obviously the neater the pattern is. Because if you're pinning away from the holes, then your pattern is going to show that. Okay, so you want to be nice and neat because that'll be make your work a lot neater. Okay, that also kind of leads into one of the other ways your work can be neat. Okay, so now we're going into some general tips, and that is tension. Okay, so tension is when you're working your pattern, is how you're gently tugging at the threads as you're going along. Okay, so as you can see here, so in this thing, what we did is we used support pins. So what it is as I was adding pairs, I was hanging them off a pin, and then the idea was to take away the pin once you've used that thread and then gently tug down to make it all nice and snug. So there I did that. There I forgot. So those threads are just hanging there. Okay. But as you can see there, you know, some of these look very neat and some don't, because I didn't tension it nicely and pull those extra threads down neatly. Okay. Now here, I tensioned relatively neatly when I was pulling down my threads, making them all nice and straight. Okay, and obviously the key thing is that the tighter you tug, you want your threads to be nice and flat and snug. If they're not snug, then it means it can move around. Like for example here, these are all nice and snug. Here you can see these have got a bit of give in them. So they're not completely as nice and tensioned. Okay, but that's something you learn as you go along. Okay, so yes. So the key thing is, I mentioned following lines. So in patterns, we have lines we follow. Okay, so if I just want to find some of the other ones. So now here, this is another pattern and we're following the lines. Okay, so we're coming down, and so in torsion, you work from highest to lowest. So here it's pretty easy, highest, and you're working your way down. Okay, and then you're following the lines. Okay, and that's what you're doing, you're just following the lines. Over here, the spider, and what you do is with this one, it's a bit tricky because you kind of got to actually throw out pairs that you use in your spider, but you're following your lines. Your lines tell you how to go. Okay, here there's not really lines, but these dots actually you treat as lines. So I'm highest to lowest, so I'm going to work my way down. Okay, and then here, so one of the tricks on torsion is sometimes highest to lowest doesn't work, like over here when you've got to do the spider. So the spider is that spider there. Okay, so now the trick is with this, what you got to do is you got to do highest to lowest, then you got to work an area to give you the legs you need to do your spider. And then once you've done your spider, you're going to throw out legs, and those are going to feed into the other area. So that's the one thing, and that's the key thing of why you build up as you go along, is you're learning things, you're learning bits and pieces, and you're getting better at it. Okay, and you learn how to do things. So as you go along, you will learn what bits to do when and what feeds into what. And that's the key thing. So you'll learn different types of stitches, you'll learn aspects, design aspects, and you'll learn how to do what when, so that they all feed into each other. Okay, so that's the key thing. You'll slowly learn what concept will feed into which. Okay, so and then you can then do big fancy things like this, and then you're putting all these concepts together. Okay, so you'll get there. Okay, so like I mentioned, so tensioning, putting your pins in carefully, the neater you work, the neater you do it, the neater you work. Okay, so that is very important. Closing pins. Okay, so this sounds a bit weird, but what it is when you're coming to that dot, okay, you're going to do the stitch, okay, then you're going to put a pin in, then you're going to add a twist. So you see here I added a twist on all these outside edges. So generally you add a twist on the outside edge. So you do your stitch, whichever your stitch might be, you put a pin in, you add a twist, and then you do your stitch again, and thereby you enclosing the pin. Okay, so you see there, if I put that pin in there, okay, so I came to there, I did the stitch, I added a twist, I did the stitch again, and then I worked backwards. I went back into it. Okay, so that's what you call closing the pin. Okay, so obviously we're enclosing it completely in the stitch. There might be times, certain styles, where you don't do that. you do your stitch, you put your pin in, and you move on. Okay. But your pattern will tell you that, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay. The other thing is, I said, if once you've wound your bobbins, okay, don't touch them again. And because your fingers got natural oils in them, okay, and you see I've handled this piece a lot. It's a starter piece. I don't care. It's not like a big fancy special piece. Okay, I only spent a couple hours on this thing. It's not an issue. But you know what? If you've got a very exotic piece, a piece that you spent a lot of time on, you don't want to handle it a lot and mess with it and dirty it and things like that. And your hands has natural oils that will actually add on. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'll show you when we're winding the bobbins how you can loosen a bobbin without actually touching the threads. Okay. So it's just something to think on. The other thing is, sorry, I'm just double checking my notes. The other thing is documenting your work. Okay. So you might not care in the beginning because you just want to get started. But trust me, in the end, it's going to matter. Okay. You want to make sure you've got your work documented. You want to write down when you started a pattern, when you finished a pattern, what thread you used, what bobbins you used. Thread is very important if you're using colors, because if you run out of a color and you need to get more of it, you want to make sure you match, because some shades of colors might be very close. I just want to mention, so something I read once, okay, and that was a way to keep track of how far you've gotten. So let's say you've got your pattern, and when you get started, what you do is you put a pin where you start. Okay. Then you carry on working. Once 2 hours have passed, you put another pin in there. Okay, because that's where I started, and I've spent 2 hours. So you put a pin after every hour you're doing it. So like, let's say you finish it now. Okay, so let's say I did it and I stopped over there. I'm going to put a pin there. Then that way, next time, I know that that's where I'm starting. Well, it goes without saying, I'll see in the pattern. But that'll be a note for myself. And then once I've done 2 hours, I'll put another pin there. So that way, it adds a nice visual thing for you, so you can see where you stopped and started and how many hours you spent on it. Okay. So that's a nice thing, because I mean, I don't always have a piece of paper scribbled down next to me and that kind of thing. So this is a nice way of doing that. Okay. And then a final little thing, what people don't always realize, you actually, when you're working on your lace, you're staring at the back of the lace. Okay. So you're staring actually at the back of it. When you take it off and you flip it over, that's actually the front of the lace. Okay. So in some pieces like this, you won't tell the difference. You really, really can't tell the difference. But in others, you can. So let me just find some examples. So there. So if you see in this picture, you can't see the knot. So this one, we went all the way around, and we joined, and we did knots to join the threads. Now, because I can't see the threads, I know that this is the right side. The wrong side where the knots are is on the back. Okay, so this one you can't tell. This one you can kind of tell because you can't really see the knots. They kind of on the other side and that. Also, another thing that's interesting, I read it somewhere else, where it's we in the Western kind of cultures, we read from left to right, from the top to the bottom. Okay, that means the spot we look at last is the bottom left. That's something that people that do newsletters and newspapers and all that, they know that, especially for advertising. So obviously the more expensive advertising will be kind of towards the top, whereas that will be the cheapest because that's where people look at last. It's just a human thing. I think the Japanese would probably be the reverse because they read from right to left and such. So the idea is, if you are going to take a picture of your lace and you've got a join like that, always put it on the bottom left, because that will be where people look last. So therefore you're hiding it a little bit more subtly, because people won't see the join as easily if it's down here than if it's, you know, up here. So it's just a different thing. Let me see if I can find, okay, these you won't notice the difference because these are all one way or another. Okay, this one over here, so you can see the joins over there. Okay, and you can see that this is actually the right side because you can't see the knots too easily. So that's also something you get better at as you go along, actually doing the knots a little bit neater so the join is more subtle. Okay, let's see, yeah, this one here. So you can't see the knots, the thread's all coming from the bottom. So this is the right side. Okay, so that's one of the things when you do a style where you're going back and you're joining it again. You want to do those knots as neat as possible. And then some people, what they'll do is they'll take your threads and they'll sew back along the join. And that works in certain areas. Like here, you see you got this thickness of the foot side. So this is a foot side, and this is the foot side, this is the head side. So because you've got all those thick threads, so you can actually sew some of those along here. You won't see it. The problem is, because this isn't very thick, you might see it. So in this kind of a case, it might be easier for you to do the knots very carefully and just cut them off. Because you might still see a vague thickness there, but it might be more subtle than sewing the threads back. Okay, but this is something where, you know what, you'll get better at doing the joins as you go along. Because as you saw, I mean, this is my friend Kathy's pictures, and you can see the join on these is a lot neater than the first time she did it, which is over here. So that wasn't as neat as the others. So it's something you get better at. Okay, great. So I'm going to stop there and do a next video which will cover winding and working your bobbins.